Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing great, and I do hope you're having a lovely day and that you're ready to settle down to a fabulous story tonight. So before we get started, go and get yourself a lovely drink, because I've got a fabulous story. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, the main street during this lonesome, quiet and unassuming time of year seems sleepy, with overhanging grey clouds contemplating rain. Everything is steeped in a long, lingering, drawn-out silence, for winter, like a black panther, had made her stealth-like, clandestine approach. She cruelly snatched the last vestiges of autumn away, grabbing her by the jugular until she hemorrhages out the last of her withering leaves, which had fallen to the ground in haste and had long since been blown away by the breeze. The sorrowful, lugubrious skeletons of ragged trees, devoid of all their finery, stood on the fringes of either side of the road, in their immodest nakedness, a shame from which they could not hide, for their roots had been firmly anchored on the street for over 300 years, so bashfully, like the emperor with no clothes. They will blush self-consciously until the spring gleefully arrives, and once again, graciously their boughs will be resplendently bedecked with the modest finery of fresh green leaves. It would seem autumn had been swift this year, as if it had all but been a fleeting memory, as even the meteorologists were predicting that it would be an icy winter with bountiful snow that would bury our street and our cars under its thick glistening white carpets. Winter was a time of year when visitors that flocked to Lake Michigan would abandon our town in droves, like flocks of navigating birds, looking for sunnier destinations where they could escape the wrath of a punishing winter that knew not the meaning of the word mercy. I can see a team of kids walking up and down the street, bouncing a ball and chatting jubilantly among themselves, apparently oblivious to the piercing cold fingers of winter and an uncongenial wind that whips up their hair like a feisty blow-dryer. A crow on the corner of the road is dining out on a carcass of a rabbit, while little birds have found someone's leftover burger bun tossed in a roadside drain and are hungrily digging into it with an ardent zeal. Things get desperate at this time of year, and animals forage for what they can find. I'm wearing my pleated pants, cotton shirt, and black bow tie on this bodeful day, where the sky simply refuses to wear a more cheerful ensemble, setting the tone for the bleak days that lie ahead, of which there would be many like this. I was glancing out of the expansive glass windows of the coffee shop where I worked as a waiter, and general all-round dog's body, of which I was not spared some of the less dignified, rather grim jobs, like cleaning up the disgusting toilets and wiping down unfortunate sticky spillages from clumsy, ungainly customers who visited our coffee shop. The sprawling main street consisted of a long ribbon of houses and shops on either side of the asphalt road, mixed together like old friends, many of them 1950s houses that had been converted into businesses, shops and bakeries. The coffee shop where I worked overlooked a house on the opposite side of the street that belonged to the town psychologist, or shrink if you like. Some preferred to call him that, whose unassuming white house with blue shutters was like a beehive of buzzing activity all day long, from 9 to 5, which made me poignantly aware that I was not the only person with problems in this world. It would seem there are many of us. How bad were some people's personal issues if they had to seek out the help of people like Dr. Jeffrey Monroe? Imagine getting paid to listen to people telling you what was really irking them underneath the deceptively calm veneer that they might present to the world. Did people like Dr. Monroe have a bird's-eye view of really what was going on in people's heads? Their secret lives, so to speak. That was when I saw her. I do not know why she grabbed my attention, but she did, with the same kind of wow factor you might get if a mountain lion enters your field of vision. She was pretty enough, but that wasn't the reason I was drawn to her. It was something else. I watched her in her black and white checked overcoat, opening the doors of the 1950s home over the road, where Dr. Monroe would see his patients. I suspected she was a patient, and contemplated what it was that she would be sharing with the psychologist. For a brief moment, I almost wished I could be a fly on the wall, to listen in to their conversation. I imagined her sitting on a soft leather reclining chair, spilling out her guts to a man who gets his kicks listening to people's grievances. I was staring out of the window like a gormless idiot who had been struck by lightning and was momentarily stunned. All at once I felt Mrs. Rodriguez's hands on my shirt, tugging me away from the window. "What are you staring at, Scott? I don't pay you to stare out of the window all day long. Now get a move on, will you? There's work to be done, tables that need to be wiped down, floors that need to be swept. And the couple at table number 7 are still waiting for their coffees, and you haven't taken their orders yet. Honestly, I rue the day that psychologist moved over the road from us. Everyone wants to gawk at the man's patience. What is it about people who come in here to snoop, to find out who in their town is a head case, so that they can have a good old gossip? It's scandalous if you ask me. People can't keep their noses out of other people's businesses because their own lives are so dreadfully boring." Was she pointing a finger at me, I wondered? Did she think I was a prying snoop? I nodded, my face blushing as red as a field of poppies. "Sorry, Mrs. Rodriguez," I said, snapping into action. I knew better than to rub her up the wrong way. Let's just say, as annoyingly pedantic and punctilious as Mrs. Rodriguez was, she had been a godsend to my life, for her wages had kept the roof over me and my father's heads, which was nothing to be sneezed at. Granted, the money she paid me was mediocre, but I'd rather work like this than get Social Security handouts from the government any day of the week, for I valued my independence. My mother had abandoned our lives when I was about 7 years old. Of course, I knew the real reason why she left, all those years ago. She had left a note behind for my father which read, "Sorry, I just can't do this anymore. I'm not cut out to be a mother." I knew growing up I'd infuriated my mother. In truth, I was the reason she had left our home. She had made her feelings clearly apparent in that note she had left my dad. I was the thorn in her side. I had always been a highly strung, timorous and painfully shy child, certain that there were monsters lurking under my bed, that were waiting to pounce on me and gobble me up for breakfast. My father worked night shift as a guard for some large office warehouses that contained valuables that needed protecting by nightly patrols. I would run over to my mother, grabbing her, clutching onto her for dear life, while tears streamed down my little face. "There's a monster under my bed, Mummy. It wants to eat me up," I'd wail. "I'm scared, Mummy. Please can I sleep with you?" "For God's sake, Scott," my mother would grumble, "go to your bedroom right now. It's the middle of the night. I'm trying to get some sleep. Can't you get it into your thick head? There are no such thing as monsters. Now stop being such a big baby. And no, you may not share my bed with me." My mother offered me no sympathy. I was too afraid to return to my bed, so I would lay down on the floor in the hallway to sleep next to the old grandfather clock that offered me some comfort. I felt safe next to that grandfather clock. Its clicking mechanisms made me feel that it was alive, watching over me like a walnut matriarch. My father, when he returned home from work, would find me lying fast asleep on a cold floor in the hallway. He was more than a little mortified by this. My parents would naturally argue, and usually any disagreements between the both of them would centre around me. I was always the root cause of their problems. If I was plucked away from their lives, the problems would go away. If my mother nursed any regrets in life, it was almost certainly giving birth to me. I had been a fortuitous accident that none of my parents had expected. "Be reasonable, Hilda, for goodness sake. Our son is only 7 years old," my father had said gingerly. "Were you not afraid of the dark when you were only 7? Give the boy a break, will you? I found Scott asleep in the hallway. He could have caught his death of cold. You should have tucked him into bed. That's what a good, responsible mother would do. But not you. No, that was too much to ask, was it not? All you care about is your own creature comforts, Hilda.
But it's not natural, nor is it normal for a mother to be so indifferent towards her own son, like you are. You're the problem. Our son is an innocent young boy, but you are his mother.
Oh, for goodness sake, Adam, listen to yourself. You've no idea what I go through every night when you're working night shift. Scott clings to me like a limpet. That boy is afraid of his own shadow. It drives me completely insane. I'm not good with kids, never have been. I told you that when we got married. You were the one who wanted a child, not me. But I rue the day when he was born. I'm sorry, but it's true. I wish I could turn that clock back, because I would do things so differently. I would ensure that he was never, ever born.
You don't mean that, sweetheart. Scott is young. He won't be so needy when he gets older. He'll grow out of fearing the dark. I promise you that.
My mother never hung around long enough to find out if I ever did get over my dreadful hang-ups about the monsters that lay in wait for me under my bed. When my mother left home, my father continued to wear his wedding ring on his finger, in the vain hope that my mother would one day come back. He dated most of the available women in town, but that wedding ring resolutely never left his finger. I often wondered what those women he dated thought of a man clinging so desperately to his past, refusing to let it go. I don't think it amused them in the least. My father never managed to develop any meaningful relationships with women, beyond some pitiful, rather pathetic one-night stands that left him slipping into a deep depression, for as he would tell me, meaningless encounters with women like that left him feeling frayed at the edges, for they cared not for him, and any physical interaction with someone who didn't care a toss about you was a vacuously hollow experience. My father hankered on to the hope that one day my mother would return home, walk through our front door and say she'd made a dreadful mistake by leaving us. But his illusory, fanciful dream never came to pass. When I was older, my father began to drink and was no longer capable of maintaining a 9-to-5 job. I had abandoned a college scholarship in order to take care of my father, which was why I was working at the coffee shop, against the advice of some of my well-meaning teachers, who thought staying with my father was pure folly. But they didn't understand. No one understood. Indeed, I think the whole town felt sorry for me, as all my friends went to college, and I was the one left behind, sweeping up the coffee shop floor for a living. And that, many people thought, was completely crazy. Don't throw your future away, Scott, for your drunken father. This is your life. You have so much potential. You could really make something of yourself. Who knows, your leaving home could be the kick in the teeth your father needs to finally get his act together and pull his socks up. That's what my teachers would tell me. I stayed here in town because I had a fierce loyalty to my father, especially after my mother had abandoned us. For it was my father who'd been the one to pick the pieces up of our lives, the one to assure me that there were no monsters lying in wait for me under my bed, the one who was always there to put a band-aid on my grazes when I took an unfortunate tumble, or to give me a glass of warm milk and cookies before I went to sleep, the one who'd been faithfully by my side through thick and through thin. Loyalty like that is invaluable. It is something you can never ever forget. It's priceless. Now it was my turn to return the favour. I owed my father big time for holding the fort up for so long. It was only in the last couple of years that my father, like a flagging tent in the wilderness, had begun to crumple under the harrowing effects of a lost hope. In my father's case, I think when he came to the realization that my mother was never going to return home, that was finally when the scaffolding that had held his dreams in place had come crashing down like the wall tiles that fall away from a crumbling grout. On several occasions my father had nearly burnt the house down by leaving chip pans smoking away on a gas hob and forgetting all about them. It had been a close call, with the house so nearly catching alight. My father was a danger unto himself, a liability. I decided from thenceforth I would take care of him, managing the bills, cooking the meals. Nothing fancy, usually something out of a tin that could be easily heated up, like spaghetti hoops, chicken nuggets, frozen pizza,
That was the least I could do for him, when he had sacrificed so much on my account. In truth, the wrecking ball that had demolished our lives without apology had been my self-centred mother. I despised her for what she'd done to us, and all these years later she hadn't even bothered to call us once. I often thought, when I glanced out of the coffee shop window towards the psychologist's office on the opposite side of the street, that me and my father were probably two people who could well do with Dr. Munro's services, as in our own ways we both had big issues. We could possibly both do with a much-needed listening ear to give us a sense of perspective over our lives. So often I felt as if I was navigating my way through quicksand, and I unequivocally perceived my father felt much the same way, as although he never expressed such thoughts, we were like two peas in a pod in that regard, firmly locking away our feelings in a box in our mind, throwing away the key so no one could break into our iron-cast safe of vulnerability. As a young man, I was shy and unassuming, and only ever had one girlfriend in my life, when I was about 16 years old. I just wasn't good with girls. I'd clam up like an oyster in a shell, and become incredibly self-effacing and reserved. If the girl was attractive, it was 1,000 times worse for me. I was not socially articulate or fluent like some of my friends, which was something I deeply regretted and willed to change if given the chance. I was sweeping the linoleum floor when the girl that had caught my attention over the road after visiting Dr. Munro's office entered the coffee shop. The bell tingled, and Mrs. Rodriguez guided her to a lonely table and took her order. Our coffee shop was purged of all its customers that had long since left, who would be back the following morning. Everything about our coffee shop at this time of the year was mundanely predictable. The same faces, the same orders, the same monotonous conversations, in the same monotone voices that would predictably ramble on about the weather. "Too dreadful," they'd say. "They're predicting snow this winter, yet again, and lots of it too. I mean, look at that gloomy sky. I think we're going to have it bad this season." The mysterious girl, whoever she was, did not appear to be predictable. She was like an unexpected, fortuitous arrival on Groundhog Day that signified the fragrant whisper and pleasing bouquet of change, for there was nothing nondescript about her. Yet she was ordinary and unexceptional all the same, and yet at the same time she wasn't. This was an enigmatic woman who had got me by the short and curlies, as I couldn't figure her out at all, like a mathematical conundrum that you simply cannot decipher. If I were a bee, it would be her can of fizzy cola I'd be buzzing over. The girl had ordered a ham and tomato sandwich and a vanilla latte. She sat there staring out of the window, her eyes pinned fiercely on Dr. Munro's office, with a wistful, longing kind of look on her face. The shops in town had closed early in the late afternoon. The quirky little gift shop over the road that sold the cheesy little greeting cards, fluffy toys, fridge magnets, and cheap little medallions with slogans like "World's Best Mother" on them and "Dad, You Rock," had closed their doors, as had the ladies' boutique, whose fashion displays in the window looked more frumpy rather than elegant, offering size XXXXX many times over. Some of those tops could easily fit 10 bodies rolled into one. We should have closed up shop already, but the only person keeping us waiting was the young woman who was drinking her latte, rarely late in the afternoon. She was still staring out of the window vacantly, obliviously unaware that Mrs. Rodriguez was waiting in the wings for her to pay her bill and finally leave the premises so we could close up. The late afternoon looked grim, the sky a gunmetal grey colour. Some street lights, sensing the growing greyness on their sensory mechanisms, had finally switched on, so that their lights could subdue the approaching darkness that would soon descend over our small town. Mrs. Rodriguez had told me that I could go, which was rather good of her. "I think you better make tracks, Scott, before it gets dark. I'll see our last customer out." "If you're sure, Mrs. Rodriguez," I said, stifling a yawn. "I mean, that's very kind of you." I was exhausted, as running around a coffee shop all day, attending to the demands of customers, was very taxing. "Of course I'm sure, Scott. You're a hard worker. Even I know you need a break. It can be punishing running on your feet all day after all my customers. Now off with you." I slipped gratefully into my hooded sweatshirt and my puffy overcoat, and then I pushed open the glass doors of the coffee shop. The invigorating November air greeted me with its icy kisses.
I slipped my hands into my pockets to keep them tucked away from the cold. The whole town was marinated in the mute whispers of a soundless silence, with only 1 or 2 cars interrupting the solitude when they swept past me on the long grey ribbon of asphalt. The trees on either side of the street, devoid of leaves, moved their boughs in the breeze, while the lights of shops and houses twinkled like Christmas lights through the veil of grey that was slowly descending across town like a tenebrific mist. That was when I saw the girl again. She brushed past me hurriedly down Main Street, her hands buried into her fleece-lined pockets, her colourful scarf floating around her neck in the wind, while her long brown hair was tucked safely under a red woolly hat. She didn't notice me as I ambled down the street, but I was compelled to follow her, as if this strange woman had procured some bewitching hold over me. There was something about her that intrigued me, with the same kind of mystifying allure that attracts moths to light. I kept a safe, very discreet distance behind the girl, so she didn't know I was following her. Why was I following her? Even I didn't know the answer to that enigmatic question. I was walking in the opposite direction to my home, but follow her I most certainly did, with a magnetic pull that I simply could not overcome. She passed the carousel and moved steadily towards the beach. The lake pounded against the washed-out colour of the sandy shore. It is only during the lighter hours of the day that I would appreciatively observe the whitecaps arresting the sand like a charging cavalry of white knights. But at this time of the late afternoon, the lake seemed ominously still, almost too still, as if basking in the solitude of this lonely late afternoon. My sneakers padded over the soft contours of the sand, some of it wilfully sticking to the soles of my shoes. I trudged past patches of stone-washed grass, bleached by the hostile cold weather, vanquished of all its former viridescence, for the winter's savage austere grip on the landscape is never kind, never merciful, far from sympathetic. I can see a man on the pier, looking out over the waterfront views, with an expression of wondrous awe on his face. Perhaps he's not from around here. I think I can understand his reflective revelry, as under the sinking light of the late afternoon, everything looks magnificent, washed under the mesmerizing golden glaze of a dipping sun that pirouettes so elegantly over the landscape, dappling the water in a linear streamer of glittering gold. The young lady I had followed seems equally as enchanted by the view, as much as the man who has now left. I can hear his car finally whizzing out of the parking lot. She stares over the water as though transfixed. She's definitely not from around here, I decide. It is usually strangers who stand in awe of the views that locals so easily take for granted. I hastily retreat to the shadows so the woman cannot see me. I don't want her to see me, lest she should think I'm some kind of creep, or worse still, a dreadful pervert. I'm neither of those things. I meander towards a wooden island decked out with picnic tables and chairs that overlooks the beach. I sit on a chair and stare out towards the lake, my eyes focused on the young woman 40 feet away. She sinks into the sand, with her legs close to her chest, and stares out towards the water, as if caught up in a meditational stance, where her mind is soaring up into the sky with the gulls, but her body left far behind. What the girl does next astounds me. I told you there was something very unusual about her. She pulls off her black and white jacket, throwing it onto the sand, as if it's surplus to requirements. Are you kidding me? What the hell is she doing? My heart freezes as I watch the woman disrobe. There is nothing seductive about this unveiling. She blows all caution to the wind with the recklessness of a toddler attempting to swim without its armbands. One by one, boots, socks, sweater, and finally her jeans lie in puddles on the sand. The young woman runs into the water without any hesitancy, only wearing her underpants and a light flimsy vest. Are you kidding me? Am I really seeing what I'm beholding right now? Does she remotely comprehend how cold the water is? The icy wind thrashes against her face audaciously, but she doesn't seem to care about that. And when the temperature of the lake is below 40 degrees, it surely threatens hypothermia. But she seems to embrace the cold. I stand there as dumb as a dodo, almost as if I've been stunned by 1,000 volts of electricity, and am totally incapable of rationalizing any thoughts. I find myself wondering if this woman, who moments before was unloading her problems with Dr. Monroe, has now decided to call it quits on her life, and this is the way she wants to end it all. Because life has got too much for her. Will I be the witness to her very last moment? Should I call for help, I wonder, dipping into my pocket for a cell phone that I realise is not charged? Just my luck. Why the hell did I forget to charge it? I watch in confoundment. The woman swims in the lake, diving beneath its depths, until I cannot see her any longer. Oh my God, where has she got to? My heart thunders violently against my chest cavity, while chills of impending dread prickle my spine. But the woman rises again, with the grace of a dolphin against the waves. Then her body, now blue with cold, dashes out of the water to retrieve her heaped pile of clothes lying spilled haphazardly over the sandy shore. Finally she gets dressed. Perhaps she wasn't planning to take her life after all. But who would willingly choose to swim in an icy lake at this god-awful time of year? No one normal. Perhaps she really is a head case. Is that why she's seeing Dr. Monroe? Because she has big issues with her life? Yet despite all these poignant considerations, this woman who first grabbed my attention is still managing to hold my thoughts like no other, and try as I might, I simply cannot get her out of my mind. I retreat back to my home, where doubtlessly I will find my father, parked in front of a television set, knocking back tons of beers, as he becomes slowly more and more bladdered. Luckily he's not a bad drunk, but there's something so soul-destroying about seeing someone you love slowly slipping away from you, like the sands in an hourglass. For sooner or later, without any doubt, his liver is going to pack up, like a car engine that has seen better days, and that will be the end of my father and his very, very sad life. Try as I might to not think about the woman, she keeps reappearing into my thoughts. I wonder if I'll ever see her again. The thought of not seeing her again makes me suddenly feel quite sad. It is early in the morning that I briefly glance out of the kitchen window that overlooks views onto the street, the tall lofty oak trees, the residential houses. Our kitchen has a bird's-eye view of the creepy-looking abandoned house over the road from us, the house that is the talk of the town, with a morbid reputation and a more than ambiguous history. I'm preparing coffee and toast to line my stomach sufficiently before I return to the coffee shop. Another day at the grindstone. I was looking out of the window to gauge the temperature outside, so that I would dress appropriately for work. Would I need another jacket, I wondered. As I suspected, the sky was grey as ever, with that overcast, lugubrious look, which assures you the day will be cold, windy and grey. Nothing new. And that is when I see the young woman again, that had beguiled my fancy, stolen my interest, and wormed her way into my heart like a caterpillar in an apple. I notice she is squeezing out of the window of the abandoned house. The house in our neighbourhood, with its illustrious reputation for being haunted, made worse by the woodgrove that fringes the backyards of those properties, and stretches back for many miles. I could see that the window of the abandoned house had been cleared free of all of its glass, and I realised the young girl must have broken into that property. She was not the first, nor would she be the last to do that. I watch her barrelling down the road, with her large canvas bag thrust over her shoulder. What the hell was she doing, I thought. Please God, she wasn't going for another cold swim in those treacherous waters at this hour of the morning. The very thought made me shiver with cold. The house over the road had been abandoned for years and years. It now belonged to the bank, but I think the bank obviously thought the demolition costs were way too expensive, so it had sat there like a lonely old spinster, with peeling paint, withered windows, and a sorrowful look, growing more and more desolate every single year, even bleaker than the icy cold weather itself. The front yard was overgrown, with weeds tangled amidst the grass, and ivy crawling around the outside walls. The house's sinister appearance and haunted reputation that preceded it had not put off squatters from moving into the place, but unlike most properties, where its illegal occupants would lay down semi-permanent roots, the squatters over the road would come and go like hibernating squirrels, They'd never stay for very long, so maybe there was a smidgen of truth to those ghostly rumours. It was the following evening that I noticed the light of the abandoned house switching on and off, and that was when I realised that the girl was probably back, and thoughts of her stuck in that freezing house did not sit comfortably with me. Why did I care so much about this strange girl? I wanted to go over to the house with a blanket and some food to offer her. I wanted to help this young woman. But wouldn't it be presumptuous of me to interfere? Some people didn't appreciate perfect strangers poking their noses into their lives where they didn't belong. My father was sitting at the table with a relaxed expression written on his face. He was happily tucking into the oven-ready chicken nuggets and chips I'd prepared for him. He was not as drunk as usual, but then again the night was still young, holding seductively in its hand the guileful promise of drunken opportunities to be engaged that my father would never refuse. He invited beer into our home, like a long-lost beloved friend that you haven't seen in years, a friend you held in high regard and never wanted to leave. My father would always tremble if he hadn't had enough to drink, but once he'd been through a stash of beers, the trembling would subside. He looked green at the gills this evening, but that was not something new for him. It's funny how alcohol can destroy the radiance of your complexion, rob you of your robust health, destroy your cognitive abilities, and age you like nothing I know. My father, with his corrugated fine skin, looked older than his natural age, 60 going on 80. Suffice to say, I was the one that gave my father an allowance for his beers, for without that allowance he would likely spend everything we own to raise money to support his habit, and giving him an allowance nipped the problem in the bud. It was the better of two evils.
"Why do you keep staring out of the kitchen window?"
he asked me, waving around a chicken nugget at the end of his fork, rather precariously. It looked suspiciously like it might do a somersault and land on the linoleum floor in a messy splutter.
"Are there more squatters over the road again? More of them moved in, are they?"
"Something like that," I said grimly.
"It beats me," he said, shaking his head dismissively, "why anyone would ever want to live in that god-awful house." "Everyone in town says it's haunted," I told him. "You do know what happened there?" my father asked me, popping a chicken nugget into his mouth. "Quite the story it was." "I've heard rumours about the place, but no, I don't know what happened there. I was very young at the time." "By Jove, I think you're right about that," said my father, wiping away the crumbs from his moustache and taking a large swig of beer from his can. Let's see. Yes, you were about 6 at the time when it happened." "What happened?" I prodded, my curiosity aroused. "When the young boy living over the road hung himself in the closet. I think he was about 15 years old." "You're kidding," I gasped. "It wasn't pretty," said my father. "That poor family, what they must have been through. It's a tragic story. Turns out the boy was being bullied at school. He was so miserable. He took his own life. The family living over the road were good people, you know, but they fell apart after their son died. It shredded their relationship. They blamed themselves for not realizing that their son was so unhappy at school. They slipped into a deep depression, as you can imagine. I believe the lady of the house couldn't get out of bed in the morning, while her husband began to shoot up with drugs to escape his desolation, a little like me with a drink. Things spiraled out of control. The couple lost their jobs. The bank repossessed the house, and ever since then, the house has remained unoccupied. The bank failed to sell the place, given that no buyers wanted to buy a house where a young boy had hung himself. Mud sticks, you see." "That's understandable," I said. So there you are. That's the end of part 1. Part 2 is tomorrow night. Until next time, good night and goodbye.